Did you know that for nearly 20 years, Christmas was banned in Boston? Or that on this island in the harbor, hundreds of Native Americans were put into an internment camp? Or what about how right around here, a Catholic woman was hanged partly because she didn't speak English? My name is Khalil Green, and I've spent thousands of hours researching and sharing creepy, crazy, and covered-up stories from American history. Stories that reveal shocking truths about how our country was formed. In 2024, I even won a Peabody Award for making a TikTok video series about the hidden history of New York City. Now, I've teamed up with National Geographic to uncover more of these stories in cities throughout America. This is Hidden History. Today, we're headed to Boston, Massachusetts. Through its museums, monuments, and plaques, Boston celebrates its colonial legacy unlike any other American city. And from its founding, this place was seen as special, destined to be a city upon a hill and a shining example to all. But here's the twist. Though revered and celebrated, Boston's early settlers upheld practices that were anything but admirable by our standards. They imposed strict religious laws, punished dissenters harshly, and laid the groundwork for systems of discrimination that would echo through the centuries. Here are just 4 stories that put this shocking reality on full display. That big gray building behind me is known as Paul Revere's house, but before that, it was actually the residence of Increase Mather. Now, Increase Mather was formerly a Harvard president, he was a Puritan clergyman, and he also supported banning Christmas. The Puritans were Protestant Christians who sought to purify church practices by distancing themselves from Catholicism and any acts that they believed weren't in strict adherence of biblical principles. So in 1659, they wrote a law that made Christmas illegal because they said that Jesus' birthday was never mentioned in the Bible, and they associated the revelry that took place during the holiday with paganism and social disorder. Their desire to purify their faith often spilled over into actual hate and discrimination against people of other religions. Even though Boston is now known for celebrating its rich Irish heritage, like with the basketball team the Celtics, the Irish population in this city used to face intense persecution. This is because the Irish people were mostly Catholic, and so they practiced a different form of Christianity that the Puritans found unacceptable. For example, in 1647, all Catholic priests were banned from the city, and it wasn't until 1780 that Catholics were allowed to worship in public. All that said, I'm standing at St. Stephen's Church in front of a plaque dedicated to one of the city's saddest stories of anti-Catholic and anti-Irish bigotry. Goody Ann Glover was a widow who lived in Boston with her daughter and served as a caretaker. When some of the kids under her care became sick, the doctor declared that the cause was witchcraft. And Glover, an Irish woman, was the main suspect. She went on trial, but the odds were stacked against her. At some point during her trial, Glover was asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, but she could only do it in the Irish language or in broken Latin. Later on, her prosecutors searched her home, where they found small figurines that were probably representations of Catholic saints, but that they deemed were false idols. Now, with enough evidence, Glover was convicted and executed on November 16, 1688, years before the Salem witch trials. Even after her death, her heritage affected how she was remembered. Powerful men made bigoted comments about her background. Specifically, a Puritan clergyman named Cotton Mather, who was the son of Increase Mather, the man who supported the ban on Christmas, said that she was a scandalous old Irish woman, very poor, and obstinate in idolatry. Now, Glover is remembered as the first Catholic martyr in Massachusetts, and Goody Ann Glover Day is celebrated here in Boston on November 16th. Right behind me is the Massachusetts State House. And if you've ever seen the Massachusetts state flag, you'll notice that in the center of it is a yellow Native American man holding a bow. But above his head is a detached arm holding a colonial-era sword. In recent years, this symbolism has been met with controversy because the real history between the Boston colonists and the native peoples of this area was rife with violence. One of the strongest examples of this brutal reality was King Philip's War, and especially what happened at the end of it. In 1662, a Wampanoag man named Metacomet, also known as King Philip, became sachem or chief of his tribe. Although his people tried to live in harmony with the colonists, the English settlers encroached further and further onto native lands. The English also destroyed crops with their livestock, challenged native culture through attempts to convert and assimilate them, and brought forth diseases that decimated indigenous populations.
Tensions burst when the English tried and executed some of Metacomet's men. And in retaliation,
Metacomet and his people started to kidnap, attack, and kill English settlers.
This started King Philip's War, also known as Metacom's War, in 1675.
Because of their knowledge of the terrain, Metacomet and those loyal to him actually had an early advantage in the war. But things started to change when the English colonists started to rely more on their native allies and take a more offensive and aggressive approach.
And in doing so, they committed mass atrocities.
The bloodiest day of this entire war actually occurred in Rhode Island in an event known as the Great Swamp Massacre. During this time, English colonists and their allies set fire to a fort, killing hundreds of Narragansett men, women, and children, despite the fact that that tribe had declared themselves neutral during King Philip's War. By August 1676, King Philip was killed in Rhode Island and the war started to subside. So right now, I'm in the very peaceful and serene Boston Commons where people are strolling, picnicking, and hanging with their friends. But right here, at the site of the Great Elm, is where over 50 Native Americans were executed at the end of King Philip's War. Now, many of these natives who surrendered were promised pardons by the English colonists. However, even these people were executed without trial. During the war, this part of Boston, known as Deer Island, became a prison camp. Estimates are that between 500 to about 1,000 Native people were interned on Deer Island, and that half of them died during the winter due to starvation and cold. Now, most of these people were women and children. After the end of King Philip's War, Native ways of life in this area were deeply devastated, and the ground was laid for the complete colonization of what would become the United States. Right behind me is the Salem Witch Museum here in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, every year, around 2 million people come here, some to visit the magic shops, others to go on ghost tours, some even to perform rituals. But above all else, this place is famous because of the Salem Witch Trials. Now, the Salem Witch Trials is a story that's been covered many times in movies and TV shows, so it's not exactly hidden. But one part of the story that's not explored as often or as accurately is the role of Tituba, one of the first women accused of witchcraft who was actually an enslaved woman of color. Her story unveils a complex dynamic of race and racism at the center of this old American tale. Now, the play that made the Salem Witch Trials super popular in the United States is The Crucible by Arthur Miller, which came out in the 1950s. If you're familiar with that play, you may remember Tituba as a black woman who practiced voodoo-like rituals. In this story, she's associated with brewing potions, conjuring spirits, and a number of other stereotypes of voodoo practitioners. But the reality was that Tituba back then was never referred to as black, and there's definitely no evidence that she practiced voodoo. These details were added later on as they fit preconceived notions of what an enslaved person was. Tituba was actually an indigenous person, likely from South America. According to their best estimates, historians believe that Tituba was a part of the
Arawak tribes of northeastern South America, which includes countries like modern-day Guyana and Venezuela.
From there, she was captured and taken to Barbados to be enslaved as a domestic worker. At some point, a Puritan minister named Samuel Parris came to Barbados and bought Tituba. He brought her to Boston, Massachusetts in the year 1680. Almost a decade later, Tituba, Samuel Parris, his wife, 3 children, and other individuals that he enslaved moved here to the Salem Village Parsonage, which is in Danvers, Massachusetts. Just a quick note, where I was earlier in Salem, Massachusetts was actually the site of Salem Town. Where I am now in Danvers, Massachusetts is actually the site of Salem Village, and this is where the Salem Witch Trials actually started. Everything changed in January of 1692. When in this house that I'm standing in right now, Samuel Parris's young daughter and her cousin started to complain of very strange symptoms. They were barking and yelping, flailing, speaking nonsensibly. They complained that their skin was burning and of bites and pinches from invisible creatures, just to name a few things. And even after a month of fasting, prayers, and home remedies, nothing got better, so they were visited by a physician named Dr. William Griggs. And what he pronounced was that their symptoms were caused by bewitchment. When the girls were asked who they thought might have caused this, they pointed their fingers at 3 women: Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Now, out of these 3 women, Tituba was the first and only to confess to practicing witchcraft. She admitted to having been visited by the devil alongside the 2 other women who were accused and writing her name in blood-like ink in the devil's book. After this, she said that the devil compelled her to hurt the little girls. From here, the story plays out much as you might have heard in school. More accusations, more trials, and starting with Bridget Bishop in June, many executions. Now, history, among other things, might remember Tituba as the instigator of the Salem witch trials because of her early confession. But I want to shed light on a very important detail, that because of her race and status in that society, she really had no other choice. It was only revealed years later that Samuel Parris, Tituba's enslaver, actually beat and forced her into a confession. He told her who to accuse. Now, all of this happened and could be covered up because Tituba was literally the property of another person. As another example of the biases against her, one of the women who was accused of witchcraft, Sarah Good, actually thought that because Tituba was an Indian, no one would believe her testimony. Now, Tituba was actually able to escape capital punishment because she was seen as useful for her testimonies that helped accuse other people of witchcraft. However, to get out of jail, she had to pay a fine, which she could not afford, and Samuel Parris, her enslaver, refused to pay it as well. So in the end, Tituba was sold, and from there, she disappears from the historical record. 342 Hanover Street was once the residence of Cotton Mather. He's remembered as the man who came up with inoculation during a smallpox epidemic in Boston in the 18th century. However, the person who should receive credit for this achievement has often been left out of the history books. This was a man who was enslaved by Cotton Mather, and his name, Onesimus. Now let's set the scene. It's 1721, and the terrible disease of smallpox is spreading rapidly throughout Boston after it arrived on a Navy ship called the HMS Seahorse when it docked in the Boston harbor. Cotton Mather recognized the severity of the issue and was determined to find a way to prevent the spread as much as possible. A few years earlier, Mather's congregation at church purchased a gift for him in the form of an enslaved African man. Mather named this man Onesimus after a slave character in the Bible. See, back then, enslaved people used to take care of sick patients, including those with smallpox. Despite this being the case, enslaved Africans rarely contracted the disease themselves. So when Mather met Onesimus, he asked him if he ever had smallpox. But Onesimus told Mather that he had undergone a procedure that prevented him from contracting the disease. Onesimus even showed Mather the scar that resulted from this procedure and explained to him exactly how to do it. This procedure was known as inoculation and was very common in Onesimus' homeland in West Africa. After speaking to many other enslaved Africans who told him that they were inoculated in their homeland, Mather urged physicians in Boston to attempt the process of inoculation. However, only one, Dr. Zabdiel Boylston, agreed to try it. In 1721, smallpox continued to rage throughout Boston, and many wealthy Bostonians fled the city to escape it. Amidst this, Dr. Boylston quietly inoculated his son and 2 people that he enslaved. 2 weeks later, all 3 patients were completely free of symptoms. But despite this success, Bostonians who heard about the inoculation became enraged as they were skeptical of the process. One man even threw a bomb in the home of Cotton Mather and left a note wishing smallpox upon him. In May of 1722, 1 year after the epidemic started, the last Bostonian smallpox death occurred. Over the course of that year, approximately 6,000 people, or about half of the city's population, contracted the disease, with 844 of them dying. 4 years later, in 1726, Dr. Boylston published a report on the findings of his smallpox inoculation trials. Of the 286 people that he inoculated, only 6 of them died. Now, this made his inoculation efforts a massive success, but one that would have been wholly impossible without the contributions of Onesimus. Though we're separated from these stories by hundreds of years, anyone who loves history knows that what happened in the past affects everything that comes after. Take the Irish Catholics, for example. It wasn't until fairly recently in United States history that they were fully accepted into American society. And the same prejudices that were leveled against them back in the early days of this city are echoed in the rhetoric used against immigrants to this country today. And just like Onesimus, the contributions of enslaved Black Americans continue to be overlooked, leading to the founding of commemorations like Black History Month. These observances are necessary for making sure that our stories are told and remembered. And of course, the Wampanoag and other native peoples with deep roots in this land continue to fight against erasure, preserve their culture, and find joy despite centuries of violent oppression. Their resilience is a testament to their enduring strength. Though these facts and figures might just seem like a footnote in American history, learning more about who they are and what they went through helps all of us become more aware of issues faced by marginalized groups in this country right now. And in doing so, we can work towards creating a society that can serve as a shining example to everyone and truly live up to that ideal of being a city upon a hill. Is there another hidden story that you want us to explore, or a city that you think we should visit next? If so, drop a suggestion in the comments. We're always looking for new ideas and we'll do our best to make them happen. Until then, see you in the next city.